13. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Riepel.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Does turn the quorum. Number one and only one, discussion on 2020 budget.
If you don't mind, I will.
Cliff notes, blue cliff notes.
Yeah, Cliff Notes, okay, yeah. I will let Carla go through this, but the beginning part of it, but just to let you know, she did in my opinion, a very good job of putting together the 2020 talking points again, as far as what we've identified as our visioning goals, what we have outstanding as far as items that we've identified that we would like to fund and potentially get done here in the foreseeable future, and where we are at with the preliminary budget based on what the cost estimates are going to be for personnel, wages, insurance, those type of things based on our contracts. So with that, I'll let Carla go through a couple of the items and how she got to the point where she's at.
Thank you. I guess it's not a packet anymore because it's online, but that's wonderful. I didn't have to spend any time printing, so thank you. So under budget talking points, like David said, we're talking about plans. Number one is plans for projects within fund balance. Projects include Civic Center, VFW refrigeration replacement, Blue Line Arena floor, Civic Center parking lot, Big Lynn Roundabout, and then we also have the federal dollars that come up every fourth year, and the next one is in 2022. And we have talked about, alternative funding for these grants, bonding, sales tax. We could have a tax abatement for recreational facilities. I guess that's just up for discussion. We have discussed that in the past few meetings, so it's kind of everybody's brain. So I guess it's just reassuring that these are the things that we're looking at. Number two, South End Bridge, and of course the question is where and local share on that. Number three is assessment policy, streets and utility and funding, and, question of city percentage, which we've talked about our assessment policy, which is still under discussion, but listed are the projects that Steve Emery went over at the last meeting, so I will not repeat them. Number four, bring financial reserves to target. The question is, what is our target? In the packet, I included the city policy, which says 35 to 50% of funding operating revenues or less than 5 months of operating expenses. And that first color document that I sent you, if we had the budget the way it was presented here, even though there would be expenditures over revenues, we would still have 51% of our fund balance would be 50% of revenue or 50% of expenses. So we would be within that policy that says 35 to 50. So it's just a matter of what you decide you would want your target at. Number five, expand Civic Center West and refurbish VFW, which is still a number one. And number six was restore trust. Number seven was strengthen city-school partnership bond. 8 was amend the city charter, which we're working on. And 9 was upgrade city facilities, which we're continually working on. Questions or comments on that? Next document attached is the colorful one. Nobody thought budgets could be colorful, right? Anyway, on the left, we have a visioning goals, which we brought up at a council strategy session. I know there's been talk about having another one, but these are what came out of that visioning goals, and I actually hit on those on the talking points. So if you have any questions on that, I will just, I know you all see that. To those that are listening or viewing, this document is on our webpage, and you can follow through if you could tonight. That would be great. So on the front page, I just put on there what our beginning fund balance from 2018 was $6,019,602. The projected total revenue is off the new revenue sheets I gave you. The expenditures are off that, and this would be our estimated fund balance if it was a great world and we got exactly what we expected and spent exactly what we expected. So on the next page, we have it broken down on how and percentages of what we collect in revenue. Of course, our largest is property tax levy. That would be half of it basically on that pie. And I'm not going to hit on those. I know you can read them all yourself. Expenditures, we have them split between current expenditures and capital outlay. And then the next section, we just kind of hit on each department and what we feel their basic, not their need, but what their function is, excuse me. Then we get into the bottom where the property taxes. Property owners reside in East Grand Forks city limits. City of East Grand Forks, what they pay in their taxes, 43.51% goes to the city, 29.22% goes to Polk County, 15.72% goes to the school district, 7.58% goes to the voter-approved school district, which is the bonding that went on for the high school. Watershed is 3.44%, ambulance is 0.39%, and then Northwest Regional Development Center is 14%. So I did put an example in here of what the breakdown of the 2018 property taxes were for a property value of $244,700, and excuse me, it's 2019. That didn't get changed. Just so you can see, the total was $3,538. So then we get to the real numbers here. Megan did hand out a new report of where we are for revenue expenditures. I did have the department heads review it, and we actually had some updated numbers because the pool is now closed, so thank you, Reed, for updating those. So we have closer, real numbers of what the pool was, which we... I think we budgeted $35,000 last year. We collected $42,500, so that was a great year. I know when we were looking at it in June, June was just outstanding. It's like, wow, we'll really break the numbers. But that was also the month where people buy their passes, and so they actually won't pay the rest of the year. So we had a great year at the pool. Thank you, Reed. So anyway, we have it all broken down to, like I said, the property tax revenue. This would be at a 5% of what we are paying this year. As you all know, that does not mean everybody's property tax will go up 5%. To be honest, we don't have an idea. The county doesn't have an idea. Well, I do know with the county that they expect to have about $12 million of new property coming in. So the pie should get smaller for everybody out of it because we're putting that into the mix. Because, just a reminder, we're not on a mill system like they are in Grand Forks, so we can't just take what your property values at whatever percentage we decide. So we're just guessing at a 5% right now. And in the past, we've waited till the Truth in Taxation comes out in November, and then we can see how that affects property owners. Just to let everybody know, we do, when we budget, I have a document that looks just at personnel costs, the increase from one year to the next, and that increase from 2019 to 2020, we're expecting to be 5%. Any comments on that? Or
5%.
Is that salary wages, or is that?
That would be
Total
benefits too,
Total
salary
benefits,
wages and benefits, insurance, so,
Not a 5% levy increase, a 5% increase over the previous year.
correct,
Yep.
yeah, just so we know that the personnel cost would be a 5% increase of what personnel costs were last year, and, I was thinking I had the personnel broken down here. Don't have that, but I can get that at another meeting, sorry about that. But we do know that it's a very high
have it,
percentage,
yeah.
probably about, thank you. And what is it? It's about 80%? It's on the next couple pages. So the numbers we have now on our estimates, we're going to collect $11,394 and $817 million. Our expenses would be $11,635,902, which means our expenditures are over our revenues by $241,085. And then attached is all the detail. I'm not planning on going through the detail unless you have questions. So I guess we can just start questions now, or unless David has some comments.
I guess the only comments I have is that next week we do have a work session again. I am planning on bringing back the the street assessment policy. I do have the information from the other cities that were requested. And so I can give a report on what they do. Again, we have to remember that if we're going to adopt something like that, now would be the time to start talking about the funding source where we could get that. So with that, I guess the other thing I would say is the fund balance that we have now it actually exceeds what our requirements are now. We've actually had a couple good years as far as underspending what we anticipated the budget. The fund balance has gone up. So at that point, we would need to decide what we're going to do with that. And I do have some suggestions for that if the council would like to hear those later on as we discuss. I guess what I would say is, depending on where we go with the property tax levy, I think what we have a lot of unmet capital needs. I would suggest that we take the fund balance, the excess fund balance, and start putting that into what we feel is our biggest priority for our capital needs, whether that be street assessments, whether that be parking lots, whatever. But I think that would be a good place for us to start with, utilizing some of those excess funds. So,
Are you talking to go down to the 50% then?
yes.
So 2.86, we moved to a fund designated for whatever.
Correct.
Anything else, sir?
Yes.
Coming out of CAFR, I can't remember, what did we show as a surplus from last year? What was that number?
The difference from last year to this year?
Or, yeah, the
Budgeted
2018
actual.
end of year balance.
yeah,
Actual.
500,
budget.
wasn't it about around 500 or so?
Well, actually, fund balance went up about 500,000.
Yeah.
And there were a few items that were out of the ordinary. Like I mentioned before, the campground, we did receive payment for 2 years on that because we did collect it this year quicker than normal, which is probably about 150, I believe. So that was part of it, off the top of my head. Federal grants, we did have one more safer payment and a couple other things. So I know the revenue, that was things in the revenue side.
And I guess I've said for a while that it's okay, I think, to think of that dollar amount kind of as a standalone dollar amount, and then decide, generally it could go in one of three different buckets or in three different directions. One would be to add it to our reserves if we wanted to do that. Two would be to use it to reduce the tax load for the following year. And three would be to fund priorities that we've identified. So you'd look at that 500,000 plus or minus, and you'd say, do we need any part of that to go into our general fund reserves? I think the consensus of the group is that we do not, that they are at a reasonable target. And then we're down to how much of the 500 do we allocate for property tax relief for the following year, and how much do we set aside for long-term and arguably even some deferred maintenance that we have here and there, or a local share of some infrastructure like a bridge, roundabout, or if we redo the street assessment policy, there would be a local citywide cost for that. So I guess I'd have us each consider that 500. Probably we're good on the reserves, and then how much do we use to relieve some property tax increase for the following year, and how much do we set aside for these infrastructure type expenses?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking of that, so, you're talking about 500 plus or minus of reserve excess from 2018, but we're showing a almost $50,000 deficit in this year. So I guess the budget year 19, has that been modified or adjusted, or is that the actual write-off of our budget document?
No, this is off the fund balance from the 12/31/18. And that's because there's just some difficulty in guessing, because a lot of the money comes in towards the end. People make purchases towards the end. I know we're still getting in capital items, and so the only close thing would be is if we were even close to what we did last year, but that's still not really close. But, I guess my estimate is that I don't feel that there's any area where we're really going to overspend, and I don't believe, Dave, we have looked at it. I know we're planning on bringing an updated expense, which I will bring next meeting, but we are still waiting on work orders and such, so we wouldn't have a real number for some areas, because some areas do use our work order system. I know police uses it a lot for their vehicles and such. So I will bring that next week. But I guess the bigger guess is other years past.
Yep.
It's not like people go and spend every dime they have at year end. I mean, we don't have any department, with the mentality, if I don't use it, I lose it.
I guess
Which
my point
happens in
is
a lot of places.
You need to carry that number through all these other budgets, and we're not talking about $500,000 excess. Right now, we're talking about $250,000 excess. And that's,
Last year, it was $194 to the good. So I'm just saying that's even.
Budgeted, yep.
Yeah.
that was
So,
our budget,
yes.
Budget, yep.
but it's
So I'm
probably
just,
going to be.
and I'm
more.
saying hypothetically, if we approve this as it is, which we would not, it's all in flux. But if we did, we're saying we're willing to take roughly half of that overage from the year before and apply it to tax relief, so we do not have to raise taxes as much on our citizens in this cycle. That's what we would be saying is, we're willing to take roughly half of that surplus from 18 and apply it to this.
And still have our fund balance 51% of our revenue, or 50% of our expenses, which is still basically outside our policy.
In other words,
From
above
35 to
our,
50.
more
It's
than we
still,
need.
yes, still more than we need.
Yeah.
I have a question about I think it was number 3 on the first page. Is there a time horizon that, I don't think the engineer's here, but maybe you could answer. Is there a time horizon that we are anticipating acting on those, or are they all on hold in lieu of financing, or are we planning for those?
What are those?
Oh, sorry, the streets, sorry.
Assessment policy number 3.
Assessment is number 3 on the budget talking points. Assessment policy, you have a list of 5.
Well, I
or
guess, I guess
4 plus future.
I can answer that to a certain degree, and I'll defer to Jason if he has any further comments on that. But right now, they are, in my opinion, they are set up pretty much the way they would be ranked. Probably the highest priority we have right now is the 20th Street Northwest and Fifth Avenue. And a very, very close second is letter B there, the 11th Avenue Northeast, the Highway 2 frontage there. They're both, depending who you talk to, almost impassable. However, again, with the policy that we have not moved them forward on that due to the fact that with the potential objections, we just haven't seen it yet.
There's nothing in this budget for those specific right now. Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Demers?
Not right now.
Mr. Vetter?
Thank you. Have we looked on our debt side? Is there some debt that we can pay off with our excess fund balance that we might capitalize on?
I know that when we did the last bonding, which was in 2017, we did refunding, and most of them come up in only certain times. And actually a percentage on, I know we did that with the water fund, and I have not looked to do that with any of our debt. But I can look at that this week for the next meeting. That's a good question, thank you.
Is our debt service, and answer that, just on the page, our debt services, our debt payments right now is at 88,000 is what we have to kick in?
Well, and those are only debts that we have the tax liability to pay, where assessments are paying themselves. And so with water and light, it's a little different because those expenses would come out of the regular expenses, where none of our interest expenses are actually coming out of our general fund. So to a point, it might not be cost-effective to do that. But, yeah, we don't have any general fund debt. When we've done the debts, we have never done our own share. We've always had money to pay our share, and so we have never bonded that amount.
But there may be some capital ones there that might free something up in a capital fund or something?
We
to
do
some
have a
of these?
few left in our central equipment fund.
Okay. But let's take a look at them
Okay,
and see if it
I will do that.
might be
Thank
in our
you.
best interest to pay some of
Okay.
those off first, and then we'd still have then the capital fund then to do any maintenance or deferred stuff that we were looking at
Okay.
then anyway.
When you do that, is there gonna be, the way you finance through the capital improvement, fund, could there be like, say you take, could there be seen some inequity of how you pay off debt? Because then all of a sudden, someone else has extra money to spend in their budget because they have an expenditure line for that? Or would we try to take them down at the same time? Or, I don't know, I mean, that's the only thing I can think of is.
Well, my thought would be that the capital fund itself would be saving money because it wouldn't be putting the interest out. The departments would still be paying the capital fund back. So you'd actually get more money into the capital fund then.
Yeah, if you look in the back here, we do have in the capital financing fund, under the capital improvement fund, and we do have a lot coming up in 2021 that departments want. One of them is the Civic Center turf, which, looking at, Altru gives us X amount every year. That would be something we might not have to finance, just because we have the money sitting there. But there's $785,000 in that fund for 2021, which basically depletes that fund. And we don't have a lot of projects after that. I guess what we could do is look at the departments to see, what kind of things they're looking for in the next 5 to 10 years, and that might be some place that we could do some of the projects. And that was my hope, too, with the building maintenance fund, that if you looked at, I know I had the schedule, if you looked after so many years, that maybe we could do a project for $500,000, like the Blue Line Arena floor or something. If, with sales tax, and we chose not to do the sales tax or something, some of those funds could do that. But, we do always have ongoing repairs, but, I know that the fire department, we have on the schedule for next year to do the roofing. I know Nancy has some things here in City Hall. Eventually, the painting, if we'd ever get anybody that would want to do it, would be a large cost. But I think everybody else's buildings are, speak up now, or, yes.
Wastewater buildings and somewhere.
Yes, and we just didn't have a number on that yet, that's why it's not included, but they are working on a number, thank you, Jason. So we will include that, and it will be quite costly because it is a brick and mortar building that needs repairs.
Police Department, we do have funds requested in the budget presently for new updating our door access and also replacing our fire alarm panel. And we're still trying to get better numbers on the cost for revamping our basically all the electronic monitoring and maintenance for our jail cells. And that's, we're waiting for Johnson Controls to get us some numbers on that.
And that's the only number that's not included in the budget, is for the 4 cells. And as soon as we get that, we will update you that on that. But if you look in our building maintenance, we get $250 a year, and we are not, according to the schedule, we're not planning on using that for the next, all of that for the next 4 years, if you look at that schedule.
So are you saying that once he gets that, this 241 might be negative 300 again?
Say that again, please.
When he gets numbers in, he says it's not in the budget?
Oh, that would be under the building maintenance fund.
Okay, I just
So
wanna
that
make
would
sure.
not be part of this,
Wanna make
the
sure
number,
I
yes,
agree
that
with
would
that.
not, that's why I wasn't worried about including it, because it does not affect the levy number. It's out of the
Just wanted
building
to make sure
maintenance.
that it
Thank you,
wasn't-
thank you for saying that, thank you. Yeah, no, it would be part of the building maintenance, and we always look to see, we have it in the budget for 2020. I know that Gary's had them check out his roof. We might not do that to 2021. It just, we do look at them periodically and say, okay, we going to do it this year or not? And sometimes it just doesn't work to get the people doing it. For example, the library has ran over a 2-year period, so, but it's done, so. And she's very happy about that, so thank you.
Is the all true, whatever you want to call it, the rec fund stuff, is that part of our fund balance, or is that restricted, or how is that?
It's restricted in our grants fund,
Okay, so it's not part of that, so once
Correct.
we use it, it's not gonna.
so it does not affect our levy.
Couple questions on the charges for services on the revenue sides. The rescue unit service fee, can you tell me how that's generated?
That is generated on each person's utility bill.
Okay, so that
Yes.
is, okay.
Yep, that's
Just
at
wanted to make
$5 a month.
Okay. And do we, when we do a call and if we don't transport, is there any additional remuneration?
We charge no fee for the call.
But if we transport, does it go to like insurance or something?
No,
or-
no, and, oh, sorry.
You can't
We can't
transport at all.
transport.
We are not licensed for it, and if it did be that it came up, we would fall under all trues.
Okay.
Insurance.
They would just go through
Insurance.
their, okay. That's a separate question. Someone was commenting about how,
It was actually on the radio, I think, one day, wasn't it, Megan?
so, I just wanted to clarify that. I wanted to make sure. On our streetlight fees, it looks like we're taking in like 210,000 or something, plus or minus. But I thought on the expenditure side, we were down quite a bit less than that. Is there like a depreciation amount in that or something? Are we saving for addition? I thought that when you look at like that fund, there's a charge for electricity, right?
Correct, and we
And-
have been saving money on the utility end of it because we're switching out more efficient light bulbs.
So I'm just
And
questioning,
fixtures.
I mean, is there a reason for that mismatch? We've got quite a bit more revenue than we're spending.
No, and that dollar amount does come into our general fund, so that is part of our general revenue, just like our Excel franchise fees, any other cable fees, that's part of our general fund revenue. And yes, Water and Light has been putting up more efficient fixtures, and so our utility bill itself has gone down. However, that street fee is just like the rescue call fee. It's a set amount every month.
Right,
For
but I
each
mean, it's
person, and we have not adjusted the fee.
But the purpose of it was to pay for the electricity to run the streetlights,
Correct.
correct?
And that would be a decision if you wanted to adjust that fee so it equals more of the expenses, which would adjust the revenue amount.
Well, and
So,
I
yeah.
guess nobody wants to throw revenue away, but if we're not doing what we're saying we're doing, if we're making savings, we should consider passing that savings along. I guess, I would, on a fee, taxes are different. When people agree to pay taxes, they know it's going to general fund, it's going to be distributed out. When people pay fees, I think they have the understanding that it's for a service, and that service should be, and that fee should be commensurate with what that service is. I guess I wouldn't mind taking a look at that and seeing if those utility savings are changed. Then again, like I said, I don't know, are we supposed to pay for, new poles and stuff that come up? I don't know what the out year costs are. I don't want to short shrift us, but if we're saving all this money, we can pass it along. I think we should at least consider it, or call it something different than streetlight fees, because that's not what it's being used for. There's also that 101-34-000-34799 other cultural and recreation. It's like $200,000 that we're bringing in.
That, the campground is one of them that goes in there.
That's the campground. Okay.
Yeah, we don't collect 200 from the campground, but that's the majority of it.
And then, so like that's why that 2018 is higher. It's at
Correct.
340,000. Okay. That's all I have for right now.
There.
Now, I'm going to sound like a broken record once more just to talk about street replacement, but it does have a budget impact if we revise that policy. And you heard Carla say earlier that we've never, as a city, or at least currently, we're not in repayment of any bonds that don't have a revenue source attached to them, meaning that it went to a property owner, that it was a new street went in, and with special assessments, they're paying off the bonds over time to the adjacent property owners. So we do not have any citywide bonds for infrastructure that we're currently in repayment of. And I think we should be real hesitant to do that, because it's really nice to have a revenue source and an expense outgoing that are matched up nicely. And so as we know from a family and from a business, sometimes your fixed expenses will eat your lunch. You know, if revenues drop at all, you've got all this fixed overhead that's just hanging there that you still have to meet, whether you can come up with revenue or not. And so whatever we do with street replacement, if there's a local share, and this is just a little challenge from a budgeting standpoint, we also, if we're going to do that, and we'll talk at great length, but I'm giving you a little something to think about between now and next week when we talk street replacement. We want to set some top limit to how many streets we're going to replace in a given time frame. We can't obviously replace every street in our city in 1 year, which of course they don't need it, but there's some number or dollar amount of street replacement that we could justify or not. So how do we really by ordinance set a top limit to how much street could be replaced in a 1 year or 10-year period? And I guess in my mind, if you bonded it for 10 years and you looked at the city's payment over 10 years, that payment couldn't exceed a certain percentage of our budget, let's say. I'll say a 1% of our total budget could go towards street replacement on a 10-year amortization in any given year. So that would set a top number. Whether we bonded for it or not, we'd still have that number as a benchmark for how much we would commit to pay. Then we could also go to our residents and say, if you had a $6,000 tax bill in a year, only 1% of that went to the citywide obligation for street replacement. So it's okay. We're not really hurting anyone when we spread it out amongst all of us. But if there is a way to not have to bond it, because it is not attached to a direct revenue source, which is a home that's paying for their street, I think that's better. So that's my challenge between now and next week. Really consider, how do we set some top limit to how much street replacement we would do in an interval of time? What would be the source of those funds? And maybe we're all the way back to leaving the policy alone, as Mr. Vetter would advocate. Maybe there's even a way to do that. I have a feeling we're going to make a revision, and if it could resemble or stay as close to the current policy as possible, but also considering the budget impacts of whatever we do. Eyes wide open. The last thing you want to do is implement a policy that you can't pay for. So let's really be mindful of the cost side of it as it impacts our budget and taxing our residents.
Yeah, I guess that's actually not an uncommon way for cities to handle some of the street replacements. I don't know if you really need to do it by ordinance. Most cities have a policy that they set that they abide by for how much they're going to do. Let's say like $1.5 million worth of street repair, street reconstruction each year. Of that, they pay. Theirs is, say 50%. So then they amortize that amount. Generally, it's between 7 and 10 years. They amortize that amount, and then they levy that bond payment each year. So let's say the bond payment, just $60,000 for whatever. So then you levy $60,000 each year to pay that back, depending on what. And you could set that whatever, if you want to do 1% of it per year, whatever that amount would be, then you set how far you're going to do how many blocks you're going to do of street reconstruction based on the amount of money that you have available to pay for it. So that's actually pretty common. It's just setting on what you're comfortable for paying. And typically what they do then, what I've seen happen quite a bit is, let's say it's 7 years. So there's actually then 7 different bond payments each year, because in each year one falls off, and then you do a new street reconstruction project. So there's always that amount, but that's probably the most common method. So.
I just wanted to, my brain was kicking in a little bit here, and we do have a debt that we do pay. It's Water's Edge for the lots the city still owns. And that's the majority of, that's what basically this debt service is for $88,051 is for that area. And I guess it kind of missed me because when we sell the lot, they do pay the specials up front. But we do still have all those lots out there that we are paying a yearly fee on for special assessments. So everybody's aware of that.
Thanks.
One of the areas I saw too is, it seems like, and specifically city council, mayor, admin, our travel budgets were up quite a bit. Do you anticipate more travel? And it's not a ton of money, but probably amongst those couple, maybe a couple others I saw, it was $10,000, $12,000 that you could trim to get back closer to actuals. And that's even like high actuals.
So you're saying we've budgeted more than we've spent?
Yes.
On travel, yeah.
You know.
And that is correct, but I didn't want to cut your budget without asking you. Because if you as a council wanted to travel, I wasn't going to do that. So that would be a question for the council is, do we need to have that much in our travel budgets for the council for next year?
$5,000 budget, and
Yep.
the last, we spent 2,000 in 2016, and that was the highest. I mean, obviously, there's some potential that we might be doing some lobbying or what have you, but, you know, I think the mayor's is up, ours is up, admin's was up. There's a couple other,
They've been consistent with the year before.
Yep.
We
Police
just didn't
admin
adjust
is
them
up.
up or down.
yeah, so.
Yep.
Like I said, I think we could shave 10,000 out of some of those
Yeah,
travel.
and how this shows on here, it shows the actuals from the year before and then the 2019 budget. And
Right.
So, yeah, so it just shows, doesn't show what was budgeted the year before. Yeah, and travel's kind of a hit and miss type of thing too. It's, it really depends on what's going on, if people can get away to do go to the training that they want to or that. So it's, yeah, typically we have been spending less on travel than what we budgeted these last couple of years.
And just a suggestion, maybe David and I can look at that. Part of the thing would be is that, for example, if we decided we wanted to do the sales tax, that would be next January. So there would probably be some travel for one or two of the councilmen, mayor, whatever. So, you know, David and I could look at that and kind of maybe come up with a little adjustment. We
Right,
could
and
discuss that.
that's my only question is, if we're anticipating more, I guess we could look back to when we were doing more lobbying, I guess for wastewater or something like that, but I guess I think we could I'm a little sensitive to the travel budget.
I kind of am too, and that's why Megan will vouch that I usually don't turn in expenses. I just go. And I'm happy to do that. To me, you know, we're fighting on behalf of our community. Now, so if we had to fly somewhere, I'd probably let that go back to the city, but a drive to Minneapolis and back in a snowstorm, that's what I call fun.
Well, but like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with being, you know, reimbursed for travel. I don't think.
No, it's
I don't think
totally
it's
fine. To everyone who
you know,
does,
yeah.
totally fine.
I don't think that's a problem. I just
Nope.
want to make sure that we're not padding our budget in those areas. I'd rather come to us and say, hey, we need to do extra travel. Let's allocate some more funds. You know, do it that way rather than say, oh, well, we got money we've got space, and we say where? Well, it's right there. You know,
I'd
that's
probably leave it in, because I think, like maybe you and I go lobby the DNR for a boat landing with Reed Hutton and whatnot. So I'd probably leave it in. We can be more active in making these connections, I think, as the time goes. I think that'll be good for our community, actually.
got a couple more things. Just notice that a few of our salaries and wages have increased quite a bit, and it really. And I'm trying to remember if we've added positions or changed roles or whatever, but, you know, since the actuals are budgeted for 2020 from our actuals in like 16, which is like a 4-year span, have kind of gone up quite a bit in a couple areas. You know, and like I said, like Chad said before, this isn't a personal thing, and we've negotiated a lot of these, but you know, when you look at the admin salaries and wages, they've gone up 27% over 4 years. You know, I'm trying to look through my stuff here quickly, but like, Public Works admin is up 25% over 4 years. Streets is up 43% over 4 years. Just some of those, and like I said, it's, for the most part, I think, park areas, the salaries and wages are up 54. Like I said, some of that is minimum wage stuff, some of it is adding people, but we're a service-oriented place, and wages and salaries and wages and benefits are our driver. Also notice that we kind of may have some padding in for fuels and lubricants. It seems like those seem like they're a bit outside of where the actuals have come out. Like, I mean, they're.
You want to guesstimate what price the gasoline will be?
No, but like I said.
Sorry,
but can we
try to go, I've been trying to go what the actuals are for the past year or two, but, if we still look on it, I bet 2016 was when it was $4 a gallon. So, those volatile numbers are just really, really hard to guess at.
True, and like I said, but when you're talking in 2016, excuse me, for equipment for Public Works, they have 40,000. Now you're talking
Bless you.
70,000 over 4 years. And like I said, I don't know if that's an equipment issue, like we're adding equipment or what, but I mean, you're adding 30,000 over 4 years, which is what?
Can you tell me what line item I can look at you?
Which one are you looking
101, 43, 126, 42, 120 in the expenditures for
Okay, then
Public
essential
Works
equipment, the central equipment fund, that's when we buy the large items. We fund it with our central
But
equipment
this is
financing
under
fund.
fuels and lubricants.
Oh, the fuels and lubricants. Oh, the 70. Well, and part of that is just how much snow do you have? That's where that goes for, the plows and the trucks, and we have cleanup week. Those all add up. And I wanted to just comment, when you talked about the Public Works, we did hire, I'm trying to think of what his title, Assistant Public Works, is that the right title? Or supervisor, a foreman in Public Works, so he would be out of the admin on Public Works.
And that's, I guess,
In
my
Parks, we
comment
did add-
is
Yep.
that we need to be cognizant of that when we make these decisions. These are the type of
Absolutely.
rate changes. Like I
Yep.
said, I sit on the negotiation team. I'm very aware of that. Some of these things happen, and that's how we schedule them out, and that we hire people. But when we do that, these things have a ramification, and they
Yeah, and the wage,
compound,
they get a
and-
step for, most people will get a step for almost 8 years. Because there's 8 or 9 steps.
Right.
8 steps, yep.
8 steps, so, they won't get to the top. Some might get there sooner, but, some might be 7 years.
And I would guess for the equipment part of it, the fuels and lubricants this year is probably going to be up with depending on what happens here before the first of the year, because I know we had a fairly snowy spring. We've had a lot of rain this summer, which means that every chance that it's dry, the mowers are going. They haven't been doing it. So we've been running a lot of equipment this year. So it'll be interesting to see where that comes in at the end of the year.
And another interesting, like I said, this isn't trying to single people out, and it's tough when you have only so many staff and stuff. But in police admin, is there a reason why the FICA contributions go up to 25,000?
And that is the error that we found, that was,
Okay.
when we have a salaries budget that goes on, and that was an error, because actually with the police, they pay into para instead of the FICA. So that number is, here, I'll give you the right number, just a second. It's only like $7,100.
Okay, because yeah, it jumped from like 8,000
So that's why
to 20.
that's why there's a savings from the first one to this one.
Okay, that's part of this next.
Yes,
That's part
yes,
of that.
and I hate to say, but when we get better numbers, we will change them, we'll update you, but it keeps rolling. I hate to say that until we get to December and we decide, and then it's like, okay, this is it. And hopefully the numbers are pretty accurate then.
Question to the chief, you have new mobile data, computers. When we did the last time, we kind of went on a cheaper route. Is that the same route, or are you going to look at the tough books, or what, just as an experiment, how did it turn out, or what did you see?
You ask the officers, they would say it was a disaster.
Really?
Yeah, that was, the current ones are not touchscreen, which, so that means everything they're gonna try to enter, they're having to do with keystrokes, which is much more difficult, especially if you're trying to respond to a call. We do mobile dispatching at times, so they're receiving messages. It's not like they're just sitting and doing searches where they're getting information from our dispatchers about the calls they're going to. And so if they can open up the touchscreen, it's more simpler than trying to and find the correct keys to it. What we're anticipating buying would be something along the lines of an actual tablet that we mounted in, that may be able to be removed by the officers so that they can use the tablet to take photos at crash scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a fantastic idea. Yeah. Just, like I said, we tested it, I appreciate trying, and then another question on software and stuff, you have, the changes for your, like, was it record management software? There's different licensing or something like that for?
It's just updates.
Right.
Just, we have to pay the user maintenance fees to keep that going every year.
And has that been successful, or has there, because I've heard through the grapevine that there's some glitches with it, and is it something that we should be talking to them about renegotiating those costs, or?
We've continued to have issues with the system, but it's.
Chief, can you come up to the mic? Sorry.
We have continued to have issues with our current records management system, but it's still heads and tails better than the one we were using before that. So it's still been worth the investment, and we're working with the company on an almost daily basis to try to rectify the problems. The vast majority of them, I think, are resolved. It's certainly much better than what we were working with before.
Okay. Thank you. Made you come up.
Anybody else have a question?
Oh, one more, sorry. And we're planning on buying a columbarium?
Yes.
And this, it looks to me like we're gonna basically pay for a bunch of it out of the general fund? Or how is that
No,
gonna work?
what it is
'Cause we're
that
gonna
we have the
get
perpetual fund.
But that's like 16,000?
It's like 40,000 for the columbarium
45,000 for the columbarium.
and
the
5,000 for concrete
Right.
headers.
But we got
And
16 or
we can
something
come
like
up if
that.
you want to talk about it, please. It's on.
The price estimate for a new columbarium is $40,000. That'd be the all-in installed price. The $5,000 is for additional concrete pads to put the upright markers on in the newer section of the cemetery. So it's two separate projects. And we think that they'd both be funded out of the perpetual care fund for the cemetery. So it'd be a transfer, once the project is done at the end of next year, it'd transfer funds from perpetual care into the general fund to pay for that.
But they don't have enough money to pay for that, right? Or do they?
Yeah.
No, the perpetual care is like about $250,000. And so to do the counting correctly, we make the expense out of the cemetery. So that if you look in the cemetery's budget, there's an expense of 45 and there's a transfer in of 45. That 45 comes from the perpetual fund. So if you look at the perpetual fund, there's a transfer out to the cemetery to cover that.
I think the 16,000 number you mentioned that you may be seeing, that's what we are anticipating would be transferred into the perpetual fund at the end of the year off the percentage of sales of lots each year.
Yes, that's what
What's
it
the
is.
time frame that we need to replace a columbarium?
It wouldn't be to replace.
No, but I mean,
it would
like,
be
or
to
add
add
additional,
on. The newest one we have was installed in the fall of 2016, and it's over 50% sold at this moment. So we're seeing more than 60% of burials now are cremation rather than full burial. So that's why we're anticipating ahead that by the end of the next year, the current one that has space available will be close to sold out.
So, I mean,
So
that's
it's-
3 years going on 4.
Yeah.
So I'm getting at, is the perpetual fund generating enough revenue to take care, it be perpetual?
Well, it's 16,000 a year, that would be 3 years, and that would be, we replaced it in 4 years.
But that's
And we are.
just columbarium.
Yes,
That's
and so,
nothing
and we are tracking separately the lots sold from the columbarium, so spot sold, so we'll be tracking that.
Here.
I think if I were city staff, I would want some direction from our council on two numbers in particular. And the first is, what amount of gross levy increase are we receptive to, we the council? And I know we say this every year, and because we deal with it every year, it's very familiar to us. They've plugged in a number 5% as a total gross levy increase, and that always means whatever number of total dollars we collected last year in this levy, it would go up by 5%. Now, any new properties that came into the mix would be part of that increase, and so therefore, so long as they're already on the tax roll. Sometimes they sit back a while, but any new one coming into the tax rolls would go into that increase. And so typically, and we aren't going to be able to lock it down, but it's somewhere 2 or 3% less than the levy increase. So if we say 5, the increase that the average resident might see 2 or 3%, and so the goal would be to keep it in the rate of inflation or as low as we possibly can, say it that way. So I would think if I was city staff, I would want guidance from the council, kind of a gut comfort level. Hey, I think it should be 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 or 7 or 20% increase. I didn't say that. But I would be looking for that sort of guidance. And the other sort of guidance I would be looking for if I were staff is to say on that bottom line number, what amount of, let's say, if we're talking about the end of 2018, that 500,000 that came out, that could be allocated in those 3 different ways, how much of that are we all willing to dedicate to reducing this bottom line tax number for this year? And it could be this 241, 280, it could be 200,000, it could be 300 or 100. And so by giving them that kind of gut comfort level of those 2 numbers, we're basically setting the parameters of now staff go on back and work with your department heads and bring the numbers down into line with these parameters that we're requesting. So if I were city staff, I would want some guidance from this group on those 2 numbers as a starting point and see if you can work it to that parameter. I believe we're going to come in, honestly, that top number, I think it is going to be in that 4 to 5 range. And my heart says if we can get her closer to 4, because we're carrying over that little surplus from the year before, if we can get her closer to 4, that's great. If it has to go to 5 to properly fund the priorities of our city, so be it. And then that bottom, how much of that surplus from 18 are we willing to allocate for holding down taxes for this coming year? That's for all of us to decide. It's a total number 500. We do have these long-term and deferred maintenance items to pay attention to. And so really to me, and reserves are good, right? We're content with our current level of reserves. So how much of that 500 is going to go to that budget for our 2020 budget? How much of it do we set aside for capital and deferred maintenance? And if we gave them some guidance on that, then they could go back to the drawing board and start to just put it into those parameters.
Yeah, well, the most important number is what is the levy amount that we can put forward into our preliminary levy, because as you remember, preliminary levy, you cannot go up, you can only go down. So,
Which is due the end of September.
so we have a couple of council meetings prior to that, but yeah.
Just go off by your premise. So let's say that the money from last year is used to offset the 241, you're still at a 5% levy, no matter what, because it's negative right now.
Unless we find savings in one of the departments.
So I'm just,
Yep.
want everybody on the same page. Let's say you took the money to offset the 241, which will leave you the 240, 260 left over, but you're still looking at a 5% levy, because you're not, if you wanted to capture the 241, your levy's going to be higher, because you're negative now. So you're still looking at 5%, even if we wipe that out with what we have left over from last year. So really, that's, you're not at zero, you're not going down to 2% levy or 3% levy, so let's not get misguided that we're bringing down the levy from the 5 to 2 or 3 right away. We're still at 5, even though you wiped that 241 off, the negative. So.
And again, these expense numbers are still being worked out as well, right?
Yeah, like I said, I got a few more now, but I think everybody, and I got a couple I have to adjust, but I think they're pretty close to what everybody is looking at. I know we're looking for the detention center, but that's a different fund, so. The only other question we have is that, transit, there might be a little variety there. The state of Minnesota is going to, it sounds like they're going to be very generous. We don't know that for sure, though. She's still working on that, so that could swing it a little bit.
Well, they haven't determined yet what Dial-A-Ride's gonna cost now that Grand Forks is taking it in-house. So my number should go down.
Yeah, we
It's
have-
just a matter of how much it goes down. I wouldn't say it's gonna go down 100,000 or anything like that, but maybe 10,000.
But we've been lucky every year with transit, it has came in lower than what we expected, but we just want to err on the high side just to make sure we're covered.
Grassel.
Carly, you made reference to the $12 million possibly coming in back on the tax.
Yeah, when I did ask Polk County, and they said that we have $12 million of properties, new properties coming in this year. However, they don't have those numbers, put together, and so the best way to see that is when the truth in taxation comes out. And then I'll do that spreadsheet again, with the 4 properties to see, what their value is at and whatever percentage that we have on a preliminary, how that affects that. And that's really the best estimate we can get on where that 12 million goes.
And that 12 million is in our city limits, not across Polk County.
No, that's just ours.
Right.
He said we have 12 million of new property coming in. That does not mean new property that I believe in the tax abatement, they're already full on.
Yep, coming.
And we have budgeted for that tax abatement of 66,000, which Paul gave us an estimate from past years, which comes out of the 280 fund.
So 12 million it's for 2018 was, the estimated market value was 668 million. So that's roughly 1.5% of new
Correct.
levy. Roughly.
So it could be 3.5%.
Yeah, the other thing to look,
Maybe at 5.
the other thing to look at is that, we look at the property tax as a whole, that, the county may go down, and we know that the school district's going to stay fairly level, because that voter-approved levy's still on there, and that does that for 20 years, Chad? I can't remember.
I think there's going to be a lot of variables. It's kind of hard for us to say that we're going to, if the 12 million comes on and other things work out, we could be looking at, 3.5%, 3% levy.
On actual taxes.
Real
Yes.
levy increase.
Yep. The real difference in that, yeah.
Then that other question of how much of that surplus, bottom line, are we willing to allocate to this year's budget coming up? This would put about half of it into expenditures for that year.
Can we get the exact number?
It was 500 and change,
Yep.
like low 500s. I remember it
Get the
from the
exact
cap.
number?
521,
And we don't know what,
512.
Like this year.
and we don't know what.
And we do have a few items this year that we didn't budget, like the R-22 wasn't budgeted, and the Suburban, we knew we decided we were gonna pay that out of our fund balance. So those are just a couple items, but I know I just got the final bill for the Suburban, so we can update that on there for the lights and stuff on it. So I think we were estimating 55 on that, and then the R-22. So those are the items that we didn't have in the budget on this with the 194.
Could it be 400,000?
No, should be closer to 5.
It's a hair over 5.
Haven't changed, 5, or hair, 5, or?
In those items, I would come out of the 19, and the way it looks out, we still would estimate that there'll be some surplus.
Still 500, because it's like 590, but yeah. Any other suggestions of where to look? I'm going to look for that debt for Clarence there. That was a good suggestion. Anything else? Streetlights? I do know that Water and Light has another streetlight project, I believe that they're trying to do in 2020 and part of 2019. So we'll have better numbers on how more efficient we'll be, then, because they're going to be more efficient lights.
Then, you talked about if you had 250,000, would you buy down some of the fees that out of the
Off the water and light bill,
off the water and light bill?
put them back in the general fund where they should go. I'm always open to that.
Anybody else have anything at this time?
I know we were talking at one point about the trail maintenance, the greenway maintenance fee, and I think it would be beneficial to talk with the engineers and try to figure out if we're covering what the anticipated costs are going to be on that, because this would be a good time if we need to change that fee number to match what we're trying to do. Not that we want to put more on there, but like I said, matching the purpose. Because it sounded like we might be underfunded with that amount.
And that was one of the items that we looked at when we talked about sales tax, that we know, like in 10 years, that 13.2 miles will need to be done. Right? And I think Steve is working on
We've asked the
it.
engineers to start looking at that number already.
Yeah,
They're working
because
on it.
that was part of that when we talked about sales tax, so they're working
doesn't-
on those
We
numbers.
don't have what the number
No.
is, but we're working.
It doesn't specifically have to deal with the budget. I mean, with the levy, because it's going to be, it's supposed to be kind of like an enterprise fund a little bit, but it isn't necessarily, I guess.
I guess the other discussion on that is that, we have all the items in one, and I know we talked about sales tax. I guess the other question is, do you want us to move forward that? When do you want us to bring that to you as part of the whole budgeting thing that goes on?
Is that the number that I highlighted there? 588?
Yeah.
Okay, that's 588.
I said about 590. Yes, I said 590.
Good job.
Fall around you and a change falls out of his pocket.
Isn't 40,000 1% on the levy?
Well, it used to be back in 2000
Or what is
Eight.
it, 50?
Pardon?
now
What
it's like
changes the levy?
55.
Is it 55?
Yeah, it is, it's 55.
Is a 0.5%.
And you have to remember, the one thing that helped a little bit this year as well is that the LGA stayed the same, so at least it didn't go down from the previous year, so we weren't already starting at a negative, so.
And that was by the
It was 90
legislative.
for the last 2 years, so
Yeah.
almost 90,000, so the 180 in 2 years, so that's huge.
It would have brought it up to 7, yep.
I guess the other question for
588.
David and I is, would you want departments to talk about their budget or their changes in the budget? I guess, if there's guidance, if you'd like, or if you have any questions on the capital, if you want them to talk about the capital expenditures, because actually the capital is what really, gets us over the top, gets us over zero. We know it's every year is capital. If we didn't have to buy any equipment, we wouldn't have to worry about increasing taxes much. So I guess that's just a question for your own information of what you would like.
Are you thinking now or?
No, like the next meeting. We have a meeting next Tuesday.
I mean, I'm typically more, I like when you get a narrative about what you're doing. I guess
Okay.
puts people on the record a little bit. And gives you, I like what Chief did in this packet. I guess I like the narrative of because I went through the top, I found I had a lot of highlights, and then I get to the bottom, I'm like, oh, well, that's what that is, or that's what that is. So I do like a little bit of understanding, and like I said, a lot of those things, for me, I'm not day to day, so I forget some little nuances and stuff. Like, even for the drug task force, it went from 7 to 8 full-time members, which ends up costing us money potentially, right? I mean, we don't know what that, I mean,
Would you like me to explain that?
sure.
If you go back to the original formation of the Pine Prairie Drug Task Force, it was Polk County Sheriff's Office, East Grand Forks PD, and Crookston PD. It was partially grant funded. The rest of the funds had to come from the local agencies, just like it does now. Over the course of time, the state mandated that drug task forces had to be multi-county. And just the way it kind of worked out, ours pretty much took on almost all of northwestern Minnesota. If you go from Norman County up to Lake of the Woods County, pretty much everybody to the northwest is included in our task force. Marshall County has been what we call an auxiliary member in the past, where they would work with us and we would work with them on drug investigations, but they didn't actually have an active member on the task force. They weren't committing their body to a full-time person, or their department to a full-time person. This past year, they did request to do so. They wanted to join with a full-time member of the task force, which from a management perspective, we like it because it enhances our ability to respond to calls and to do investigations, because it's one more body to be able to do those types of things. Unfortunately, it does. Our grant fund is not anticipated to go up, at least in 2020, so we'll probably have the same amount of money. This past year, I think it was $19,000 that each agency got. So instead of there being 7 agencies dividing that amount, you've now got 8, so it goes down just a little bit.
Like 3,000 or something. Like I said, it's not a lot, but it's those little things.
It all adds up.
You know, and like I said, I do appreciate, because it lays that out in here, and, you know, I do like the further background of it too, you know. So when there are like agencies, and this is getting, so like when, say, if it's the Sheriff's Department for Marshall County, how do we verify that that's a full FTE that they're putting forward to it? And we're not just subsidizing someone, you know what I mean? Like,
Our drug task force commander is currently one of our sergeants, Isel Shraga, and so, I mean, that's probably the easiest way, because he's the one that's actually in daily contact with those folks. We have a north team and a south team, and Marshall County, I believe, is part of the south team, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But they would be working with them on a fairly regular basis. Those task force agents have to be submitting their reports. We have bi-monthly meetings of the task force command staff, or the task force board, which I'm currently the chairman of. And so, you know, we interact with the sheriffs and/or elected officials from the various representatives. Mr. Olsted is our elected official representative on the board. Each county has their choice. They can either do 2 law enforcement or 1 law enforcement, 1 elected. We've chosen to do the 1 law enforcement, 1 elected. So we have input on a consistent basis from the actual departments.
right. Oh, good.
It would be possible to maybe highlight 2, or at the time period as we have, would you have to do 2 or 3 per work session, or it can be?
Of the departments.
Right. And the time allotted that you have, for many work sessions you have.
We have it
What would you
scheduled
want
for
to
next
do?
week.
When we used to do it, we used to have, depending on, for example, when we had like Nancy, she has multiple budgets, but some of her budgets are straightforward, like transit, which you guys usually don't give too much input in on. So depending on who is, like Jason has many things, so usually we had 2 to 3 people present, or, you know, have something ready, do a presentation, hand something out to you guys. So I guess if you're comfortable with that, we can.
I would try to get them done in 2.
2 to 3, yeah.
I mean, two work sessions, 3 people a work session.
Okay.
And we can just look at the changes, basically. I mean, if there really isn't a change, or,
Yeah, I would think so, just the changes.
Alrighty.
I guess the other question is, I know Jason has a bunch of enterprise funds, and we could just do the tax levy for now, and we could do the enterprise funds, you know, later in September even, if we wanted another meeting. Or would you want it now? Because it doesn't affect the levy.
Yeah, I think we should focus on the ones that
So,
affect
yeah,
the levy.
just so you know that.
Else have anything?
Just the one other word of caution. If we're gonna, let's say we take $250,000 out of cash money that we have and put it into this 2020 budget. In the following year, if there wasn't a surplus coming out of the year before, that's gonna come to close to a 5% increase right there to cover that amount that's not coming in the following year.
Correct.
So to maintain what we've put in place here, and you're always, that's kind of your baseline for the next year is where you finished last year. And so if we put in that $250,000 and did not carry a surplus the following year, we'd have to scramble to find about 5%, a little less, to make that up and then fund our increase off of that. So I just really do caution us. I would rather see whether it could be some debt reduction or paying for some other capital purchases with that surplus and applying maybe a little less of it to this, and then keeping this number up above to that 5 number and not trying to drive that down any. Because in the out years, if you did not carry the surplus, you'd have to catch that up in a 1-year budget stroke.
If you didn't apply to that, you're looking at a 7 or 8% levy right now then. I mean,
Or some number. I mean, you just do a little less.
Unless we trim somewhere.
Yeah.
right.
So there's
Same
gonna,
as it-
yeah.
it's-
I sure like contributing to it, maybe 2% of our levy, so maybe 110 instead of the 250, maybe 110 could be bring forward. Just throw it out.
okay.
Everybody
I think we got
kind of
everything.
understood my concern with that it could, if it drops out in an out year, we would have to make it up for that coming year.
Okay. If nothing else, you guys have
I think we have some good direction.
entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Helms. Second by Johnson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. Means adjourned.
Question for any of the three. Where are you getting the 588,000?